All right. Hey, I'll just take a moment here while we're waiting for others to join. If you're new to this group, here's the idea. Once a day we get together and we practice positivity. So that from a, as you'll see today, from a uh, neurologic or nervous system standpoint, it's really just the action of saying, I'm going to carve out a little bit of time to deliberately stimulate the subjective experience of what it's like to feel positive. And we're trusting that the more we do that, the better our nervous system becomes at that. And if we do it frequently enough, it kind of becomes our new normal. So that's a really high level, this idea of brain behavior training for well-being. And we can do it pretty quickly, as you'll see today. So okay, let's get going here. So Tuesday, thinking attention training Tuesday, I'm going to go back to some basics here in terms of so what happens in the brain to attention as we try to focus it and then experience distractions and so on. So I think of this as a kind of dance. There's a constant push and pull of attention that happens. So for example, when we choose to focus our attention on an object, now it could be a conversation, it could be like we'll do today, breath, it could be anything that we choose to focus on. We're stimulating this part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. And there's a very specific part of the prefrontal cortex. I don't want to get too technical here, but it's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So the typically like the it's on the side of this part that makes us distinctly human. And so when we focus on something, if we were in fMRIs, we'd see this rush of blood to that area because the brain needs oxygenated and glucose-rich blood for those neurons to fire. So that's how we know that that's what's being activated. And so then we spend some time focusing on breath or whatever we're choosing. And then invariably, sometimes after, I don't know, 3 seconds, sometimes after 20 seconds, depends on where we're at, the brain gets distracted. We experience that as mind wandering. And then what happens if you're looking at our brain in a functional MRI, you notice all this blood rushes to these other parts of the brain other than the prefrontal cortex. And that's, we then subjectively experience that as mind wandering. So, I'm focusing on breath. And then before I know it, I'm sitting there going like, oh man, what's the grocery list? And oh, I forgot to call so-and-so. And right, there's all this activity that kicks in. So that we experience that as distraction. Then at some point we notice that the distraction has taken place. Now I know for me, depending on where I'm at, sometimes that takes just a few seconds, or sometimes it can be minutes. It can be a while before I notice, oh my gosh, I've completely sort of gone down the rabbit hole of worrying about the grocery list and dinner, this, that, and the other thing, and I've completely lost track of the original intent, which was just to focus on breath or being present or whatever it might be. But there is this inflection point where we notice the distraction. And so the part of our brain that gets activated there is the insula. And the process there is called interoception. So it's the perception of our internal state, right? So I'm sitting there focusing on breath, then the shopping list and all the to-dos kick in. Then there's this moment of, whoa, wait a second, I was completely lost in thought. At that moment, the insula is being perfused with blood. And then comes this point where I can say, wait, let me reactivate the prefrontal cortex and say, right, I was intending to focus on breath or whatever it might be. So I call this is like the brain attentional dance. And this is happening many, many times a day, probably thousands of times a day. We're just constantly in this loop of trying to focus on something, feeling distracted, noticing, coming back, and so on. So I think the more we can strengthen, especially that inflection point where we notice that we're distracted, that's a really, really key skill to develop. And so I thought, let's spend some time today practicing that. So start by closing your eyes and keeping it really simple. See if you can bring attention to the inner state of the body. Just notice, what's it like to have a body that's sitting and breathing right here, right now. This is the state of interoception. And it's the noticing of the internal states, so sensations, just sort of a general felt sense of what it's like to have a body that's feeling and sensing. And today, instead of focusing on breath, I thought, let's focus on the belly. So right in the middle of our torso, where the rib cage meets the soft part of our belly area. See if you can just focus your attention right there. Of course, you'll feel the expansion and contraction with each in-breath and out-breath. You might even have some visuals of what's going on there. And as we focus on that area, just the sensations of having this belly that's expanding and contracting, part of our brain that's being activated is this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex area. That's what allows us to choose to focus on this area. And then I'm intentionally going to stay quiet for a while. I want you to notice what happens to your ability to stay connected with the sensations in the belly. Now, some of you have probably experienced the mind wandering already. Some of you may have noticed a kind of tension. It's like, oh, right, I'm needing to exert energy and effort to stay with the sensation of the belly. Again, that's the mind wandering. The mind does not like stillness. It likes activity and busyness. And that's okay, and it's normal. But just noticing the difference between staying focused on the belly and then this natural tendency for the mind to wander, want to grasp onto other activity and things. There's a very distinct experience that happens when we notice. And so the initial intention is to, oh right, notice and feel into the body, or the belly. And then there's this sensation that kicks in where we notice like, oh yeah, but I was just completely lost in thought. So just notice what that experience is like, and then flex that attentional muscle again and say, okay, but I'm going to just gently leave that alone, come back to just noticing the belly, middle of my torso. And oftentimes when I'm teaching beginners meditation, there's this idea about meditation that it's this relaxed state where, we're just at one with everything that's happening and we sort of erase thoughts from the mind. And it couldn't be further from the truth. It's a very active process, what we're doing right now, which is focusing, noticing the distractions, reorienting back to focusing, and then it's kind of rinsing and repeating that process over and over again. And it's really hard to do. The most important part is just to familiarize yourself with the subjective experience of what it's like to focus on something. Right? There's a distinct sensation to right now I'm focusing on something. Right now I'm trying to stay focused on something. And then noticing the mind being distracted by all kinds of things that just pop up out of nowhere. And noticing when I've gone on the ride with whatever narratives or storylines or imagery that's popped up. And then choosing to reorient back to just noticing what I started off with. And take a deep breath in through the nose, long, slow exhale through the mouth, relaxing the shoulders, the chest, the belly, and hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and in through the mouth. Nose, sorry. Out through the mouth. Long, slow, intentional out breath. And hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Open your eyes, come on back. Um, yeah, I think there's a good example of it's super simple, but pretty hard to do. And in my experience, the pro tip here is lots of short, intentional sessions like this are much better than trying to sit down. Like I've done meditation retreats where you do this for many, many hours a day, and it's utterly exhausting. It's really hard work. So just sort of easing into it and just trying to flex this muscle a few times a day for short periods of time, I think is the way to go. So anyway, hope that was helpful and instructive. So, and see you tomorrow, everyone. Take care.